Meine Damen und Herren, ich freue mich, Sie heute Abend zu dem Vortrag Oikos and Attachment von Roger Scruton begrüßen zu dürfen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to welcome you to tonight's lecture, Oikos and Attachment by Roger Scruton. The lecture is the opening address of the conference A Sense of Place, Landschaft und Heimat im Umweltschutz, which I've organized together with Roger Scruton. In the conference, we wish to explore those aspects of environmental thinking that engage with the human need for settlement. We have brought together philosophers, geographers, and architects to discuss the many ways in which people have protected their shared natural assets through shaping them as a home. It is our view that current environmental thinking has been overly concerned with global problems and the often futile search for global solutions, and has paid insufficient attention to local ways of managing the earth and our relation to it. This is why, in the conference, we wish to study how people in Switzerland and in England have cared for the environment. We will try to find out whether their continuing concern for the Heimat could perhaps serve as a model for Europe or the wider world.
The Germans, as you know, have decided not to have nuclear power, not to have coal-driven power stations and so on, and to depend upon so-called renewables, and have acquired an obsession with wind farms as a result. But the consequence, of course, is that the German grid has to be plugged into the French continually to take advantage of the French nuclear power. So it's a kind of phony solution, but it appeals to many people, especially in my country, this idea, because it's a way of taking revenge against the NIMBY. The NIMBY, that means not in my backyard. The person who, the settled middle-class person who typically campaigns against wind farms and all these other things. Lenin said that socialism should be understood as electrification plus the Soviets. And it's the same idea which we see in the wind farm solution today. There is the ordinary middle-class person reduced to his natural condition beneath the electrification imposed by his superiors. But what's wrong with it? Well, I just say very quickly, you may disagree with this, but this is one of the issues that can be discussed as long as we take an open mind. It is not an adaptable solution. It won't adapt with changes in the requirements of energy or the requirements of lifestyle. It does irreversible damage to the environment. It's unreal as a solution because at maximum only, I think, 20% of power can be produced in that way, and inevitably encourages a takeover by the state. But most important for me is that it offends the only motive that counts, which is our wish to look after an inheritance. The reason why the English countryside looked so beautiful, before the wind farm was built, is that the English people have looked after it. They've looked after it because they've loved it. They've loved it because of its beauty. But once it's obliterated by wind farms, they will not love it and won't bother. And it, of course, this postpones the real solution to climate change, which is the scientific solution of discovering a clean source of energy. What I'm saying is that there are other motives than those of rational self-interest that we can call upon. And this is what I was hoping that we will get to discuss in this conference. I give a general name to this unexplored motive, oikophilia, the love of the oikos. Oikos not just in the sense of the home, but that whole that whole way of being in the world when one is at home. Oikos is better than Heimat because it's Greek and because it doesn't have the difficult history that Heimat has, which of course Germans get embarrassed by. It also reminds us of the great founding literary document of our culture, namely Homer's Odyssey, which tells the story of a person who gives up immortality and life with the goddess in order to travel at every possible cost to himself back to his Oikos, there to find that indeed the supermarkets have taken over. But he, as you know, he gets back his natural form of love. I suspect that here in Switzerland this motive has been active over the years, and indeed it's one thing for which people admire Switzerland, that it's a place conscious of being a home to its citizens. I've got just a few minutes. My final example, urbanism, which I hope we're going to talk about too. Much of the environmental movement in our time, because it has been concentrating on these big issues like climate change, has neglected the most important issue of all, which is the human habitat. Of course we should protect the habitats of animals, but what about our own habitat? We need to settle down. It's only when we're settled down that we take each other seriously. The anonymous city is one in which people live as individuals and not as a first-person plural. And the result is that as we've seen, especially in America, the growth of urban sprawl and the edge city, the city which grows only on the edge of things and is constantly moving out. And the solution here, I would argue, is aesthetic and not economic, but I think that Hank Dittmar and, Hank at least will be talking about this tomorrow. I make various suggestions here that there should be constraints, for instance, on the height of buildings, on the boundaries. Our planning law in Britain, now under threat, puts a boundary around the town and says stop. In Paris, there are constraints on materials. That beautiful stone still has to be used in any public part. And there are constraints imposed by neighbours here in Switzerland due to your local democracy. So here are a few illustrations. This is Newark, New Jersey, in which you cannot, looking at it from the air here, find a place where you'd conceivably want to settle. But you might have to end up here, which is around New Jersey, and that goes on forever. Why can't it still be like that? This is far more concentrated, and of course very beautiful in its own right, partly because of the materials, but also because people share walls, build up against each other, have a sense that when they're building a first-person plural and not a lot of first-person singulars like that. And Paris, of course, is another way forward. The monumental but still resided in city. I'm just going to conclude with a couple of examples. This is Florence, which has 370,000 people in it. Most of them in the centre, which has a 1 mile radius. That's 3.5 square miles, roughly, isn't it? No, yeah, pi r squared. Yes, 3.5. But a 2 mile radius overall, if you include the greater city. And here is our new town of Milton Keynes, on 88 square miles with 250,000 people. And this created by a top-down plan, of course, not by the natural coalescing of the people who live there, but imposed from above by somebody who thinks that this is the solution to the great problem. But what was the problem? Nobody knows. The plan, in fact, was developed by an American living in California and imposed upon the English countryside, which, of course, England itself only takes up half the size of California.